Hey there, everybody. Welcome to Bible study. Excited to keep journeying with you through this book. It's kind of nice because it's kind of going along with our Sunday school. I was telling someone the other day, as I'm going through these, I'm like, yeah, our Sunday school book. Oh wait, no, that's the other one. But like they work so well together. So if you haven't been watching the Sunday school videos, but you've been watching these, I encourage you to watch it together because they are intersecting each other a lot. So, but anyways, we're going to continue in this book here, Overcoming Life's Challenges, Lessons from the Life of Joseph. And if anyone struggled, it was Joseph. I mean, we're going to see that today. But I think it's exciting to look at. Just want to give you kind of a review so you remember where we were last week. We talked about how we're always moving in a forward motion regardless of what's happening around us. And sometimes these tragedies come so we can learn something from them. And that's basically where we're at today. And you're going to see that with Joseph himself. But we're going to get started in it. If you have the book, I know a few of you talked about maybe ordering it. So if you do have it, we're on page 14 on the next chapter. But it's a very good read, very short. I mean, you can read it in a day. So let's get started. So this lesson is about overcoming treachery. So it says, there are many beautiful words in the English language, words that are almost musical. Treachery is not one of those words. When we hear the word treachery, we think of Benedict Arnold, who sold out his fledgling nation almost before it was born. We hear Caesar in English from the knife planted firmly in his back cry, "Et tu, Brute?" Okay, there's an inside joke about that one. When I was in junior high, before one of the things we had to do was read the play of Julius Caesar, and we would act it out in the class. But we would always laugh because our history teacher was from Virginia, and she always said that it was "et tu, Brute." But we told our grammar teacher that. She's like, she said what? It was really funny. Anyways, it says, when we hear the word treachery, our thoughts flash back to a garden on a dark night, the voice of a friend, and a kiss of betrayal that sold out the Son of God for 30 pieces of silver, especially relevant in this time of Easter that we just had. As we first enter the life of Joseph, he is only 17 years old and standing at the very threshold of treachery and betrayal that will rise up out of his own family. And so we're kind of getting here into the seedbed for tension. So I remember years ago making a call on a family that had visited our church. As soon as I entered the house, I sensed the tension in the air. Whether anyone in that family had love for anyone else, I don't know. But it was abundantly clear to me that they did not like one another. In the course of my 45-minute visit, two things became obvious. The husband and wife were not on speaking terms with each other, and their personal civil war had seeped from their relationship to their children. The room was filled with tension and unspoken resentment, but the facial expressions and tone of voice spoke more than words could have ever expressed. This was a household torn by unhappiness, and in all likelihood was not what either the husband or wife had dreamed of years before when they had gotten married. We assume that families should be places of warmth, love, acceptance, and security, but far too often instead they become breeding grounds for anger, resentment, and bitterness. Such was the case with Jacob's household. See Genesis 37. Lighting the fuse of family anger. The patriarch Jacob, son of Isaac and grandson of Abraham, was learning the hard way that you really do reap what you sow. He had ignored the biblical pattern for marriage in Genesis 2 by taking multiple wives, and when he had children by these two wives and their handmaids, he ended up with a blended family. Actually, unblended would be closer to the truth, of 12 sons, all vying for position with their father. The problem was intensified by Jacob's obvious preference for his second wife, Rachel, and her two sons, Joseph and Benjamin. Joseph, in particular, was loved more than all his brothers. This favoritism by their father created serious friction in the family and resulted in Joseph becoming the object of his brother's jealousy, resentment, and hatred. And isn't that true? Haven't you ever felt that way in a setting? I know I've had awkward moments where I feel like I'm like kind of being praised at times, and it's like, while I appreciate it myself, I'm also half tensed up because I'm like, I really don't want to be identified as the favorite. But I feel like that happens a lot in some places. I am so humble. Anyways, moving on from that, there's a quote here they have. It says, all happy families resemble one another, but each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. And that's actually pretty true because people don't experience things always in the same way. Some people get upset over things that don't make sense to us, but because that's important to them, it's created a kind of friction, and it's just not good. In addition, Jacob's less than sterling character was being reproduced in many of his sons. Jacob means conniver, and he lived up or down to his name. Long before he had manipulated his brother Esau into giving up his birthright, the critical first place in line for the family estate, and then with his mother's help manipulated his father into giving him the firstborn's blessing, stealing yet again from his own brother. While Jacob was certainly not the only schemer in the family, his wives Leah and Rachel made their own contributions to the problem. Jacob displayed a lifestyle of deceit that would stay with him until he died, and obviously that kind of carried on to his children. Apple does not far from the tree. Consequently, the family was riddled with poor parenting, deception, manipulation, strife, and self-interest. Genesis 37 describes 3 points of potential combustion in the household, and this is it. Jacob used Joseph to spy on his older brothers who hated this favorite son. You know, there's the one in every family that becomes the tattletale and has to say, Dad, they're doing this. And then they all come back at him, oh, you're the favorite, Jacob made a display of his favoritism in the gift of a special tunic. We've all pretty much heard the story of the coat of many colors. And if you haven't, there's a ton of plays out there right now that's like Joseph in a Technicolor dream coat or something like that. But it's very, he's clearly the favorite. There's no questioning at this point when you watch. You're like, yeah, it's obvious that Joseph is the favorite. Everything just comes to him easily. But Jacob's attitude and actions also fed the sibling rivalry. But his sons directed their anger at their brother Joseph, not at their father, which is actually kind of interesting. Because really the father's the one doing all this, but it does kind of make sense that they would attack the brother, because they're like, but I don't know how attacking the favorite son is going to win over the father. If that's their strategy, it's kind of being done poorly. Why do you think they had to lie about what happened to him? They said, oh, a lion ate him. Well, no, they sold him into slavery. But I'm jumping ahead. We'll get to that. The conflict between Jacob's children was rooted in the problems between Jacob and his wives. The same situation is seen hundreds of years later in the household of Elkanah, where polygamy produced inevitable competition and conflict between Hannah and Peninnah. Of course, polygamy wasn't the only cause of conflict. Any breakdown in the husband-wife relationship has serious spillover effects on all the relationships in the home. And when that troubled relationship is coupled with misguided parenting, the results can be catastrophic. By showing preference to Joseph, Jacob made 2 serious errors. First, by elevating him above his brothers as the object of his love and praise, Jacob sent wrong signals to Joseph about his importance and position in the family. Second, by inference, Jacob inflicted the pain of rejection on the sons, who had once been the object of his attention but were now ignored. In fact, Jacob treated these men more like servants than like sons. The result was a relational powder keg whose fuse was about to be lit. When families became breeding grounds for hatred, the effects can be destructive and devastating indeed. As seen in this excerpt from a will of a Mr. Donahoe, dated July 1st, 1935. And folks, when I read this part, I literally cracked up, because who talks about their children this way? But basically, they're saying, this is how Jacob thought of his children. Unto my 2 daughters, Frances Marie and Denise Victoria, by reason of their unloving attitudes towards a doting father, I leave the sum of $1 each, and a father's curse. May their respective lives be filled with misery, unhappiness, and sorrow. May their deaths be soon and of a lingering, torturous nature. May their souls rest in hell and suffer the torments of the damned for eternity. What a loving father. It's difficult for me to imagine a father writing such words, let alone harboring such hatred towards his own children. But Jacob's lack of wisdom and obedience had resulted in a family filled with similar emotions. He had doused his household with gasoline, and Joseph was about to strike the match. Basically, what he's saying is the actions of the father here were contributing to all this hatred. But Joseph was bearing the brunt of it. And when you're put in awkward situations like that, you really have no say. It's like, hey, he just likes me. There's nothing I can do to help that, is there? And it's kind of true. Like, you're put in those awkward spots at times, and you sit there, and it's just kind of awkward, because it's like, thank you, but it's also like, you're not helping. Everyone's staring, It's never fun to be the teacher's pet. It's got its advantages and disadvantages. As the spoiled favorite, Joseph lived life on a different level than the rest of the family. His experience of special treatment may even have become his expectation for the norm of what life should be. His life of relative ease would have created great resentment in the minds of his brothers, a resentment that would only get worse when Joseph began to have dreams of his own advancement and rise to even greater status. Joseph's dreams predicted his future rise to greatness. But instead of keeping them to himself and seeking to understand what they might mean for his own life, he flaunted them before his brothers, who already resented and hated him. In doing this, young Joseph made 3 critical errors in judgment. He lacked discernment. He didn't recognize the troubled situation in the family. They always say you can't get over a problem unless you realize what's going on with it. That's true right here. Joseph, even though he's not the one directly contributing, it's really his father, he's not doing anything to change it. But he doesn't have the discernment. He's not recognizing what this is causing in his family. I mean, that's why he's kind of surprised when his brothers kill him. Like, oh, wow, that's weird. But he also lacks sensitivity. He didn't consider the impact his words and actions would have on family members or the hurt that they might cause. He's kind of an unknowing pawn in all of this. I mean, his father's like, this is my son. And Joseph's like, yes, I will take all of this. This is great. But he also lacked maturity. While it was true that one day he would have authority over his brothers, his actions proved that he wasn't ready for that yet. He didn't have the maturity because he didn't have these other 2 things. He didn't have the discernment or the sensitivity. And he lacked the maturity to realize that he didn't have those things. But in Genesis 37, 12 through 27, it talks about the fruit of bitterness, and it's going to give a verse-by-verse approach here. It says, earlier Joseph had brought his father a bad report about his brothers. Now Jacob sent him once again to check on their work and once again to report what he saw. This was like pouring salt into their already wounded egos. The spoiled one, the special one, the loved one, Joseph, was now their father's appointed overseer of their work. As such, they represented his very presence as they watched father's favorite approach, the pressure of resentment grew into sarcasm and anger, which quickly turned into a desire to murder him. Reuben attempted to intervene on Joseph's behalf, but was rebuffed. Finally, they attacked their own brother. Verse 23, they took his coat, the symbol of their resentment. Verse 24, they cast him into a pit to remove him from their sight. Verse 25, with hardened hearts they sat down to enjoy a meal, while their younger brother languished alone in a dark pit. Verses 25 through 28, they sold their own brother into slavery, deciding to make a profit on his life. Treachery had produced unresolved family tension, which in turn had produced bitterness, and bitterness bears a terrible fruit. For those who are familiar with Joseph's story, it is easy to say, it's okay, everything will turn out all right in the end. But those who were living it, they didn't know that. And I feel that's how we are with certain situations, when Pearl Harbor happened, it's like, it's the end of the world. But look at how it ended out in the end. I mean, we've even got good relations with the Japanese right now. I mean, who would have seen that coming back in the 40s? They're probably like, we'll be sworn enemies for life. I think about other things, like maybe in my lifetime, like 9/11. Not that any good came from that, but look what came out of it. Bitterness was taken out. Everyone seemed to unite. That's the great thing about times like these. People really seem to unite. Same thing with the coronavirus, even though there's a ton of Facebook debates over certain things right now. But at the same time, it's very exciting because, people are uniting. They're like, hey, here's what we're going to do. Companies are stepping up saying, hey, here's what we're willing to do for you. Some car insurance places are like giving money back. But, it's in these times that we pull together. And it was just talking about bitterness is the thing that makes these kinds of situations terrible. And bitterness bears a terrible fruit is what it said. And so if we take bitterness out of the equation, times like these can become a beautiful thing where we start learning. And that's what we're going to see on this last page here. Look at the immediate pain that flowed from a family eaten up with hate. Reuben mourned for Joseph and his own lack of courage. The brothers lied to their father, but never escaped their personal guilt. Genesis 42:22. For Jacob, the deceiver, now had become the deceived. Years before, he had deceived his own father Isaac by shedding the blood of an animal and using its hide to trick him out of the blessing that rightly belonged to Jacob's brother Esau. Now this deceiver had reaped what he had sown. His own sons also killed a goat and spread the blood on Joseph's special coat, convincing Jacob that the son of his love had been mauled to death by a beast. It is likely that the brothers felt that if Joseph was out of the way, perhaps their father would show love to them. But if that was the case, they were badly mistaken. Jacob refused them all, choosing instead to mourn the loss of the son he loved best. The pain he felt at the loss of Joseph was beyond comfort. It's interesting to note, however, that although Joseph had been sold into slavery, he is the only one who is not described in the text as being troubled. Even though he was enslaved, he was in the best position of them all. He was right where God wanted him so that he could learn the lessons God wanted to teach him. Lessons that would one day make him a great leader and enable him to overcome the treachery and betrayal of his own brothers. Ever faithful, God would take the evil of men in Joseph's life and use it for Joseph's good and for his glory. And folks, that's an encouraging thing. And something we need to remember in times of tragedy like this. We are Joseph and all of his brothers right now. We don't know how this is going to end. We're sitting in the pit, and currently we're being sold into slavery to a disease. We don't know what evils our new slave masters may inflict on us. But, we're just going to trust God for the best like Joseph did, because look what happened. He became the ruler of Egypt out of this and eventually got to reconcile with his brothers and his father. And That's really the encouraging thing. And so just keep that in mind, that even though we don't know the end, God has this in his hands, and we will come out of it all right. So I will see you next week.